fun time here. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. For those that I haven't had a chance to meet, I am Nate Cox, the principal here at Oak Park. And right here to my right is our PTA president, Ms. Amy Hoff. Appreciated all of her leadership this year with the PTA. I want, of course, welcoming absolutely everybody. I do want to just make a little note, specific note about the fact that, you know, this is, was it called Oak Park PTA meeting, and so I do ask that if you are not an Oak Park parent, or, so, I mean, again, everybody's welcome, and of course you'll have a chance to speak. I do ask that maybe we do be sensitive to the fact that this is an Oak Park parent meeting, and to make sure that the parents of Oak Park have a chance to speak as much as they need to, and then of course anybody else can ask as well. But just ask you to be cognizant of that. So I'm sure a long day for everybody. I know I greeted Sabrina with a good morning about 30 minutes ago, so it kind of shows what, you know, kind of a long day it can be. So two things I'd like to just share before we get started. And those of you, there were 15 or so of you parents that were here at our last PTA meeting a couple weeks ago, I shared these couple of things, so sorry for repeating myself, but as many as new people that are here, I would like to say, one thing is how incredibly proud you can be of the teachers of Oak Park for how professional they have been with your kiddos over this emotional and hard time. They've been absolutely I go around the building and get my head into a lot of rooms, spend quite a bit of time, and it's business as usual with your kids, and I really applaud the teachers for that and all that they've done. And then I would also just like to take a quick opportunity to say that last Tuesday night, being at Oakland Junior High, and on the Oak Park's Parents' Night, how proud I was to call Oak Park home and listening to many of the very positive messages that a lot of you shared on behalf of Oak Park. That was very much appreciated and humbling at the same time for the staff here. So thank you all very much for that. So I really don't have any grandiose way to kick this off. This really is meant to be an opportunity of some back and forth questions, and so we could draw names out of a hat, but no, we will just do, unless you guys have any thoughts. Okay, so with that, I will sit down and we'll start with whoever would like to start.
Can you maybe introduce who's here?
Oh, thank you. I'm really sorry. They could introduce Kristen. You want to start?
Kristen Heisel,
Thank you.
I am the Director of Finance and Operations.
Bob McDowell, Executive Director of Learning and Innovation.
Denise Petrelli.
Thank you for that. And then obviously, we also have many board members here in attendance. So if we could ask the board members to quickly just introduce themselves and say that.
I'm Tom Lehman, I'm on the board.
George Hutton, board member.
Oh, hi, I'm Paula.
I'm Shelley.
Mike Piaggi.
Thank all of you for very much for coming out.
I will start.
That's okay.
My name's Heidi Hickey. I do have a daughter still here, but 4 have been through the hallowed halls of Oak Park, and we've been proud of that, and they're all doing great, so thank you, teachers and everyone. I just wanted, you know, as I stated the other night, and I listened to the tape again, and I'm sorry I couldn't spend the whole 5 minutes, because I had a lot more to say that was useful, but what I wanted to go back to was I served on this budget cutting priorities committee in 2012, and it's been driving me crazy because I need to know how much of this plan was formed based on those priorities that were set pre-levy in 2012, so over 4 years ago. How much did that inform your decision?
Are you referring to the long-term facilities plan?
No, this
or-
was prior to that,
This
so this
was-
is well before your time.
This would have been the list prior to going out, prior to the strategic plan, there was a list developed of what the reductions would be in the event the referendum didn't pass, correct?
Right, and this was Ray Cleaner time, so
Yes.
this is, yeah, prior to all of you. The board, much of them, though, were very present during those meetings. So I guess my question was this something that was pulled out and reviewed by staff and gone, oh yeah, this is our roadmap? Or was it not even on the table?
No, it was, and Kristen might want to speak to this, but it was on the table, and I think actually literally on the table, a learning session or two ago where we had shared that there's been a lot of work all the way back. I mean, we went back to 2003 for the first document, but there have been several task forces for long-term facilities, budget cutting, facilities planning, small schools initiative, all those kind of things. So all of those documents were part of this planning and looking at where we are. And then a lot of it also having conversations with community and staff about what they really appreciated about Stillwater schools and what are those things that they were frustrated with.
I'll chime in because, and if it's not the direction that, if it doesn't address your question, please let me know, because I just heard it the way I heard it. When I hear you say that, because I'm finance and I think, you know, was this list looked at because it was a budget reduction? Is that kind of the tone of the question?
Well, the tone of the question is, how much did that inform your decision-making? Because truthfully, there's a lot of things I said and made decisions on when I was sitting on that committee that were very present at that time, that to me are irrelevant now. And so it's more than 4 years later. If that was a key component, I'd have to say, holy cow, guys, you're gonna have to do it again. Because that was then, this is now, is how I feel.
So not being there at the time, I believe that committee was set up purposefully to discuss, you know, what reductions would look like.
Yeah, and it was very strategic. There was somebody from the north, there was somebody from the south at each table. There were administrators at each table. There were teachers at each table. There was a community member who did not have a child in the school at each table. So to be truthful, there's times when I feel like, boy, I was kind of used to close my own school and I didn't even know it at the time. And it honestly, it's beyond hurtful. And we worked really hard for a number of months on that. And
But I just want to add one more thing in there, that with that last statement that you made is, you know, to be clear, this was not on anyone's radar 6 months ago. So when you say, you know, you feel like you were used to set this up for this, or that's kind of what I'm hearing you imply, that couldn't be the case, because I didn't ever have this on my radar, you know, July 1st. And so any of the work that we had done, really, you know, there was a full capacity study, there were a lot of pieces that were put together, but the learning part hadn't been addressed, or the programming part, the move to the middle school, and what might this mean if we, you know, when we made some of these moves for the bond. So I just want you to hear that there was no part of any board member had anything, or administration, any notion of doing this July 1st of this past year.
okay. That's all my questions right now.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? If this wasn't on the radar a few months ago, what's the urgency? And I have not been in any meetings, I've been overseas for 2 weeks, so it's already been answered, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
What's the urgency now versus waiting a few more months? I know there's questions about the data, looking into the studies.
You know, there are a couple of things. One of the first things that happened when we came in, and I've shared this, you know, we had some folks who've been on the team for many years and in Stillwater for many years, and some new folks coming in. There were a whole bunch of things that were going on. We had the Bridge to Excellence strategic plan, which maybe some of you are part of, a huge plan with 250 plus people looking at projects and things that were really to help determine what the future of Stillwater schools were. So we had that large plan. We had the bond, which we knew has a timeline, right? That passed in May 12th, 15th. And with that, we knew that new elementary schools were being built for the growth in the south and for Valley Crossing students who were coming in. We knew that we were moving to a middle school model and high school. So all of those things have a tremendous amount of planning with them, with staffing and transition, planning curriculum, all those kind of things. So what happens if we wait a few months? I think we're gonna be able to show you that we don't feel our data is off. We've double-checked, triple-checked on things. But the staffing and the programming and the plans for all of that, and to be honest with you, if this moves forward, we have boundaries to do, which we have to do anyway because of Lake Elmo overcrowding and then the new elementary. This gives us some time to work with the community and say, what do you want our schools to be like? Because we recognize that people want to be involved and we really want to spend some time talking about what this could be. So there are a number of things why the rush. For us, we don't feel like the data will change.
I guess when I hear the process of the budget cuts that they went through, what you said 2012, where you bring the community together and you have people sitting at each table coming up with a proposal, I think for me, if I could be part of the process looking at the data and what we're being faced with today, I think that's what a lot of the community is asking for, is time to be part of that decision, where we can have people from the north, people from the south, people from the community who don't have children but are taxpayers and care about what's happening with their community. And that's where I think when I gave my presentation, it was asking for time to collaborate with the community. And I remember asking on January 4th when we met that, is there any flexibility with the February 11th vote? And you said that there was, but not a lot. And so that's, I guess, my request, talking about we did that process and that we went through that in the past and brought the community together. I guess that's where I'm just hoping that we could consider, you know, if it's 1 month, can we put some people together, working in collaboration with you all, looking at the same data to say, let's solve this problem together. Because maybe it is 3 schools, maybe it isn't 3 schools, maybe, why did we pick the 3 schools that we picked? I think there's all kinds of questions that people are having of why us versus somebody else, or.
I'd like to expand on that why at all. What you just said is basically like saying, we're gonna cough your hand and then ask you what color gloves you like. Because your data has not made the case. And if you have data that you haven't shared, you need to share that, because all that has happened so far is alienation of this community in a massive way that you cannot understand. What my wife talked about, Heidi, was pre-levy fail. I lost friends over that levy. My trust has been betrayed, absolutely betrayed. The data that you have provided isn't correct, and again, maybe there's out there, make your case. Be respectful enough to make the case before you make the decision. The Bridge to Excellence had an excellent plan to grow the district by establishing pre-Ks, growing enrollment, getting our capture rate before the kids get their social circles set elsewhere. Now we're gonna cut our way to growth. That's the summary of your plan. It has no basis in logical planning. You said less than 6 months ago you didn't have this decision. It takes us 6 to 8 to 10 years to get a building built. How can you react so quickly? And your demographic data is now 6 years old, 4 years old. You're going to be outstripping every bit of information that you have that might be valid before the consequences of your decision even become apparent. It's just the process is flawed from start to finish. And again, you may have a case, make it. Respect us enough to involve us when it's appropriate as the decisions are developed.
Yeah, I think to both of your questions, this didn't start out as a budget cutting process. We've had those 10 of the last 15 years. Some of you maybe have been involved in those every year. And one of those slides that we've shared at several of the learning sessions is exactly how much we've cut every year. And every year when we cut our staff, our teachers, who I'm hearing are wonderful and who I've seen are wonderful, and we cut our programs. And so with the Bridge to Excellence, you're exactly right, huge, wonderful plan. But when you look at what we've really implemented of that plan, it's not going so well. And I think if you have conversations with teachers, part of what they'll say is, these are great things, but we don't have, we have to pay for them somehow. Part of the levy, when that was passed, my understanding is that the board said, here's the Bridge to Excellence, we're gonna pass this levy, but it's not going to cover everything. You need to find 25% efficiencies within your current budget, and we haven't done that.
But you
So-
just told us it wasn't a budget cutting exercise.
No, it wasn't, well, this, so when we came and
You see
started,
the issues here.
when we came and started looking, the first thing we did is we reviewed the Bridge to Excellence. We looked at the levy, we looked at the bond to say, what are those first things we need to do? During the bond, part of the thinking was that by moving the West Campus, which is our transitions, our Phase 4, and our Alternative Learning Center, and moving the current Central Services building, that the efficiencies saved from those, the operational costs would go to paying for the operational costs for the new elementary for the southern part of the district. So when we came, the first question was, well, there must be room here somewhere, so where is that? And so that's really what started us looking at buildings is, all right, we know that we have some room here, where are we going to put these spaces?
So they set you up in a situation where they set you up for a bond but no budgeted operational costs for a brand new building?
No, and
Yeah.
the rest of you can chime in, but the thought was that we already had space in our current buildings, that we could move those programs. And so to use our space more efficiently, we should move those programs in, and then the least money for the West Campus and the operational cost for that, and the same for the central services, would be combined to help offset the cost of the elementary in the southern part of the district.
I have a question about that. I sat actually in this very media center several times and listened to Mark Drummerhausen talk about the bond and like the proposal and why we should vote for it or what great things would come of it. And being an educator myself, I'm all for, you know, updating buildings and making spaces right for kids and truly giving kids what they need. I don't think that you'll find a single person in Stillwater who doesn't want to give kids what they need, right? So that's good. I want to know, and you weren't here, so you know, but was there information about that in that slideshow that I missed? Because to be honest, the part where we're gonna have to sell buildings to gain funds to finish building the elementary school, I don't, which is what, the efficiencies that we're saving,
No,
that,
not selling.
okay, well, what are we doing?
Okay, so,
Clarify what efficiencies for me are then, because my understanding is that we're lacking the funds to finish.
two different things.
Okay.
Okay, kind of to the point of, you know, the efficient, or the operational costs with the new elementary school and the addition to the high school, because you do have more square footage and you need to support that with equipment, custodians, and whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, we have kids in our attendance area that attend Valley Crossing. And so those kids, and you know, we use the number 255 to 275, whatever attends Valley Crossing at that time, their money just follows them. It goes to 916. On any given year, that ranges between 2.2 and 2.5, 2.6 million dollars. We knew that by taking those kids and you know, Valley Crossing wasn't a choice for us anymore. That we tried to buy the building, it got sold to South Flash. We're kind of down one elementary school as far as the ability to locate the kids down there. So as we move those kids over, that 2.2 to 2.6 on any given year, that money follows them into the new building. So you do cover the operational costs of what those kids would bring to function and operate the new building. The other piece of that is the West Campus, the ALC transition phase 4, the least money that we use, that money was going to go help, by the closing of those buildings, to help support the additional operational costs at the high school. So that so yes, there was figured in operational costs of what that means, and that was covered. Does that make sense? 'Cause you
Well,
have a
kind
look
of,
on-
except for I don't see the
central-
link
oh, the
between what she
central
said. Does it,
Well,
I might be the
no,
only, and
that's
I
okay.
understand
You
school
understand.
funding. Like, I do understand school funding to a certain
Yeah.
extent, right? Like, I have several master's degrees and, but in education. But what I guess I'm missing here is the part where you said that we knew we had efficiencies to,
We had
at the,
space.
at
We
the
had
central,
space.
and we needed to move central services. What are we gonna do with that building?
So when Mark and team, and I believe I wasn't a
Mhm.
part of his presentations, but having been at least, you know, in the district at the time that this happened, it was recognizing that throughout our elementary schools, there is physical plant space. It exists. We're below what we can, the number of kids we can fit in a building. Should we be exploring, and it wasn't we were going to, but it was suggested that we look at moving central services into a building. That was the conversation.
Okay.
Does central services go to Stonebridge? Does central services go to Lilly? Because we know and then, you know, essentially you reboundary push some kids, and we knew we had space where we could fit central services, physical space into an elementary school building. That's where the long-range plan, that's what Mark was talking about, that's where it stopped with that group. What Denise is saying is when she came in and this team came in and started reviewing, okay, we need to pick up and see where, you know, where's possibilities for central services to go.
Mhm.
That's when you start looking at
The capacity piece,
the
and where you
piece.
have room.
That was
What
one
I'm
of the
trying to actually
emphases.
get at, though, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We don't have, you know, we've got X amount of time. What I'm really trying to get at is, why are we getting out of the central services building? Because we have space?
We don't need to. We could
Okay.
stay where we are.
Now, when we were going through and you guys were, or whoever was part of the administration at the time were educating the public to vote on the bond and the levy. And I voted yes for it. I have two of my oldest kids are gonna be impacted. One is gonna be one of the first sixth graders, and I said this when I gave my speech. And I don't envy your position, by the way. But my my sixth grader's gonna be impacted and my ninth grader's gonna be impacted. And I looked at it all and I said, yes, you know, I believe what you're saying to me, that this will be a better education experience for my kiddos, so I'm good with that. What I also heard during that time was that it was gonna free up space in our buildings for pre-K. And that was one of the things that was sold to us. If I had known when I voted that part of that would have been that my school for my kindergartner would be gone, I would have voted no. And I feel a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, and Ward 1 Precinct 1 did vote you in, and we voted for every levy, and we are Ward 1 Precinct 1 for Stillwater. I don't know about Oak Park, but I know that we voted the bond in, and we voted every levy in, and these people are your foot soldiers when there's levies. It's just
Yeah.
true.
I'll respond to that. You're correct, the sixth grade moving up to the junior high and then the ninth grade up and then pre-K moving into our buildings was all part of that. And part of what we're hearing is, and knowing, when you have strong pre-K and kindergarten programs, you keep families and it's a great place to invest to have space. And so many districts, you know, throughout the metro area are looking at this pre-K, preschool, 4-year-old program, and they're like, what's gonna happen? It's gonna be like all-day K, all of a sudden we're required to do it and we don't have space. So we are very lucky to have that space. I think it's a combination of things. I think the thought was at the time that we will wait and maybe grow our enrollment and see if switching kids around will help us grow the enrollment. What's hard to look at in here is that we're losing 60 to 70 kids per year because we aren't providing the things that they need. And so those numbers and those spaces get bigger. And after you shift kids out, it's about 68 to 73%, I think, was our first shot at looking at, right, how much space are we actually going to have in the building? So what initially started as, where are we gonna put these West Campus programs in central service, what might that be able to look like? Uncovered that there's gonna be a lot of space here. And part of it is, you know, our declining enrollment a little bit, but we talk about the number of kids that we keep in the district and the number that we lose to other choices. And when talking to parents, as I shared earlier, the large class sizes and then not having enough support for kids were some of the things that we heard.
I respectfully disagree with you. I think that, what I heard at those meetings is the parents that were upset, the only parents that were upset were the ones in the South. And they, rightfully so, we're fixing their problem by giving them another elementary school.
My comment was, well, actually, so we might disagree, because my comment was, I spoke with parents who had left our district, 1,000 of them that are at St. Croix Prep and parochial schools, and then people within our district, not just in the south, we're not getting the services for their kids.
I disagree with, I don't think that's a problem now. I think if you build a pre-K program, you build the schools like the schools we want our kids at, the schools first, kids first programs, I think you got a lot to top, you have a very top-heavy corporation, I'm not gonna lie with you. I don't know where the budgets are coming from your administration. I'd like to see some administration cuts. But I think personally, we should let this pre-K happen, let this new school happen, and then let's take a peek at this. I think we're building all these really wonderful things, but we're not letting them happen. We're not letting them settle. And I feel like in 5 years, you're gonna come back to me and be like, oh guys, we're gonna need to build a new school north of town because we don't have any room for our kids. And it's just like, whoa, like the writing on the wall. I think that you have to budget. I think you absolutely need to budget. I think you need to find the money elsewhere. And I think you need to put our kids first by giving them the schools they deserve, giving them the classrooms they deserve. When it comes to services, then we'll get more services. Last but not least, I'm a diabetes educator. And I know you keep talking about how you want services at every school. Well, as a diabetes educator, I travel to all different clinics for our services. Fairview does not have a diabetes educator at every clinic. We have educators at, Fridley on Mondays. We have educators at at Brooklyn Park on another day. So in a healthcare, where I'm coming from as a nurse, we shift our services to different clinics, and then we say to our people, Fairview people, if you want to see a diabetes educator on Tuesday, you have to go to this clinic. Now, I know I'm not going to go there. I know but there's some pieces to that. I don't necessarily think we have to have services at every single building. I think there's ways that we can make these services go. Last but not least, I think this idea of like giving you guys this big grandiose space to have your offices is also kind of old school, right? I think there's a lot of people that can travel to different schools. I think there's a lot of people that can have kind of roving jobs. I think it'd actually be interesting to put you guys into more of like where actually things are actually happening instead of all, in your own central service building. So I just think that you need to go back to the drawing board and make some cuts and some budgets that are definitely needed, but not for our kids.
I have a question. You've mentioned the.
Can I just respond really quickly? I appreciate, what you said, and the piece that you're talking about is we don't have services for all our kids in many of the buildings, and a lot of our kids don't have the services they need when they need them. To your point though, this is before I came again, last spring I sat through some pretty rough board meetings watching our school board members being ripped apart for budget cutting for our one nurse, and trying to look at a different model. And so cutting staff is really difficult to do, and we've tried that. We've tried that. Yeah, I understand. And if you look, at a budget, and some of you who are here in businesses, and you look at your percentage of administrative to your budget, we're below what most businesses are administratively. And I think that many folks would share with you some of the reasons we are where we are right now is because we've cut and we have lots of holes in our program. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure I heard you right before she spoke. Did you say that every year we lose 67 to 70 kids because we don't have the services? Is that what you?
Do you know our exact number? Our kids leaving? I thought it was 60. I thought we lost this year in the presentation in the fall, 60.
And what services? Yeah.
So because, I just want to make the point that, let's just use the number you use, I don't care if it's the accurate, 67, because 67 students aren't getting whatever you haven't explained to us are their services that they're missing. You're gonna displace 600 students. It feels like you're taking from many to help few, and that just doesn't make sense, especially in the education
And to add on that, all your planning accepts the premise that we're just gonna lose those people. None of your planning is designed to bring them back, to retain them, to attract them.
Right.
What services, that's never mentioned.
Define what the services are, because it's a loose term, so if you could give us some examples, that might help.
Sure.
We can talk about any of the services that we talked about, from school psychologists, student advocates.
What is student advocate mean?
Social work,
Social worker. We had them for a brief time during Tom Nelson's.
we have them
You
now.
still
We
have
still
them.
have them.
Right.
These are all services that we currently have.
Do we have the percentage of kids at the school that actually need all these services? I
Do we
mean,
meet them every single day?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure
I
which
mean-
question you want me to answer
I-
first.
So many questions.
Kind of blends in together.
I guess it's, you know, if you could list what all of the services are, what schools are utilizing all of those services? It'd be nice to know how many FTEs in the district we have to support those services, and then if you say future state, this is what it's going to look like, because that would help us understand how much money are we gonna need to go from current state to future state with the capacity, I mean, that we have. I'd love to see the breakdown.
And then why can't you just realize from that, okay, we need to hire 5 more roving specialists? There's your answer. Why do you have to go to the world is ending, we're in a depression, let's close 3 schools? It makes no sense. Sorry.
Unfortunately, I can understand how you feel that way. Just alone, and I'm going off of memory on a sheet of paper, but if we were to look at just school psychologists, and we say we have 5.4 in the district right now, or at least at the elementary level, and that's divided over 9 buildings, because Valley Crossing isn't in it. If we were to, let's say now, close 3 buildings and maintain that 5.4, so now you're condensing, you know, how that looks into, you get more time in a building. If we were to not close 3 buildings and we were to look and say, okay, that FTE that we could have gotten by closing 3 buildings, what does that cost? It's about $250,000, just for psychs.
So we're just
So
worried
I
about
would-
their travel time between buildings?
No, it's, their time gets changed. So if they're at a building, let's say they're at 2 buildings, just for the sake of an example. If they're at 2 buildings and they're split 50%, so they're a 0.5 and a 0.5, and now there's only 1 building, they're a 1-0, they're there every day. Now, it's not gonna always be a 1-0 for everything, you know, but that's what happens is your divisor changes. And so to fund just that example of psychs, if the buildings weren't to close, that's $250,000 just for psychs. Now we have student advocates, I mean, so that's, I think $250,000 is a significant amount of money. I believe that. I don't know how you come up with $250,000.
What's a quarter, how do you get to $250,000?
That's what it is for
Because
one-
if you condense,
Health benefits, everything, so if you employ one person, it's, let's just say on average, it's $250,000 for their salary, their health.
Can't you
care.
employ one person and have them go?
No,
to the meeting?
right, but
Salary is what it costs.
You
to-
still are, you
what I'm
still
saying is if we kept the 5.4 FTE and we went from servicing 9 sites to servicing 6, your FTE doesn't change, but if we went back to servicing 9 and we wanted that same level of service, it's gonna cost us $250,000 to get the same level of service that we would have gotten had we closed 3 buildings.
Except when you consider, okay, so school psychs, I think we should clarify for like, what does Stillwater use their school psychs for the most part? Just because I think that there's a lot of confusion
We
about
talk
like, what is
about
a school
elementary
advocate,
schools.
what is a school psych, and I think that it's good to know. My secondary question would be, if we're gonna put that many more kids in a school, we're likely gonna need more than that one person. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know
Because
what you're
like I that's part of my life. Like so I sit in a lot of those meetings with school psychs and school advocates, and those caseloads, the more children we put in a building, we're gonna need more psychs. So I feel like the idea where we condense the buildings, we are able to put this one whole person there all the time, seems good, but I think once we increase the number of kids, we increase the caseloads. So anyway, that's all. So what do school psychs do? What do school advocates do? And
So we're looking at, you know, let's just answer the first question. So you're looking at people like school psychs, who we share across buildings. You're looking at employees like student advocates, the social workers. You're looking at people who we hire to do the Read With Me programming. Any of our title programming that we have, so math intervention, reading intervention,
EL.
EL, all of those, what you might consider as auxiliary services to students. Those are positions outside of, let's just say at elementary, like a regular classroom teacher, right? So you've got regular classroom teachers here, and then Oak Park, for example, has these auxiliary services that they share, depending upon who they are, they share a different percentage.
Some of them
And
are Title I funded.
They are Title I funding, but you still share them, right? So you can pay for them out of Title I, and you may still only get a percentage of that person based on that. So one way you could look at it is you could say, instead of having a building of 400 kids, you're now gonna have a building of 500 kids, or 300, whatever that number is. You can pick that number. And one argument might be, well, now you're gonna have more kids, so you need more. But the other argument could be, if you have the same amount of kids, now, at least if they're together, that person that's there is accessible to those kids every day of the week, versus between two different buildings, they may only be there certain days of the week. And a perfect example of that is the situation that we're in, share it with one of ours from Afton, where you have a .5, and because of how there and a .5 at, I believe that one's at Marine, the way that their schedule works as a student advocate and the way that the shared psychologist works for those students that shares with another building, we have days of the week, because of the way the schedules all work out, where that building does not have either the student advocate or the psych in that building. So that's the complexity.
So why do you need someone every day?
Well, Nate can give
you an example.
I'll be glad to give a couple of examples. Specifically for school psychologists, here at Oak Park, really they're looked at as kind of the lead special ed person for the building. They help oversee all of the due process that happens with that, and kind of our lead mentor type person for our special ed staff. They are part of what we call our RTI process, which is students that are struggling with, say, reading and math. There's a whole process we have to go through to get kids those intervention services, and so they head up those pieces. Our school psych also services about 6 students that are on special education caseloads here. Meets with those kids needs to meet with them on a regular basis to provide them some services. Usually it's some social skills services, some students with ASD here in the building. We currently, my first year here at Oak Park, we had a school psychologist that was here 5 days a week. We now have a school psychologist that is here 4 days a week. When I first came here, we had a student advocate that was here 5 days a week. We now have a student advocate that is here 3 days a week. I personally, I'm not trying to advocate, I hate saying things to shut the building down. I want to retire from this building is all I want to say, okay? I just am trying to give some examples, and I don't want it to sound like, here's Mr. Cox trying to close down the school. I will say this, I would rather have 150 more kids in this building and have services every day. I've been a principal of a building of 950 kids. Coming here was a breath of fresh air. I was at the 8th largest elementary school in the state. I still think I had a fantastic school of 950 kids because it was the teachers in the building, and it was the people in the building, it was the involvement of the parents in the building that made it an awesome school. But that's it. I would say that if you ask the staff here at Oak Park, I think the student advocate piece has been one of the hardest things that we have dealt with as a school, of going from a full-time person, where now we have a student advocate that's here 3 days a week. We share her 2 days with Anderson. And that student advocate piece really is that preventative piece on the forefront for students that don't receive special education services. But students that are struggling with behaviors, trying to put some incentives and programs and check-in, check-out in place, someone for them to meet with on a regular basis, do some friendship groups with kids, and that's one example of something that has been a strain on this building, is not having that student advocate piece here for 5 days. So.
And
I was just wondering if you guys have the numbers behind how many each of like the specialists serve at each school, and then if there was like any study done on no, this kid needed this service on this day and they didn't have it accessible, like if there was any study or any numbers broken down.
And I just jump in there. I mean, I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I found to be the most frustrating out of this is I keep hearing things that we've talked to community members, we've talked to real estate agents, we've talked to this person, we've talked to that. And I am not one to decide whether a specialist is needed or not needed. I leave that to the experts. But what I get frustrated about, and I don't want to be the one to say our kids shouldn't have a student advocate or an advocate when they need it. But what's missing is the data. Like what I'm not understanding is where the reports are that substantiate these decisions. Again, and maybe this is the right choice. I don't know, but there so far has not been enough evidence to say this is how much we're gonna save by doing this. This is what the kids are gonna get because all of these other kids are displaced. This is how it's gonna help people. It's missing. I've seen the PowerPoints, I've listened to all the speeches, but it seems so anecdotal that I can't pinpoint where it is that these things are actually gonna happen. And I wasn't here a couple of years ago, so I don't know everything about the levy, and I don't know everything about the voting. But what I can tell you is this has been, my family chose this school and this school district because of Oak Park. We moved here actually this summer because of Oak Park. We picked up and we moved here. And if things have to change so that everybody gets a great education, I'm open to that. But I've yet to see that there's any data to support the decisions. And that's where I'm getting frustrated.
So, and I guess if we're, like, when you're talking
There's a
about
couple
breaking down
hands
the
in
service-
back, you wanna let them speak, they've had
He
them
hasn't
up for a
finished
while.
answering my question.
About services, because we talked about this when I came into the office, and splitting. So the example that you gave me is, because I asked, is it gonna be 100% of the time? Is that, service gonna be there 100% of the time? And you said no. High end probably 0.8. So the other 0.2, who gets that? So it's still not gonna fix the problem. That's what I have a hard time with. If you came in and you said that, everybody's gonna have, 100% of these services 100% of the time, but you even said that that's not the case. It's 0.8 at a high end.
I'd say that's probably private school, that you could say 100% of our kids will get 100%
Well, right, but
all the time.
so we're not getting that now. So how is closing 3 schools gonna fix it? Is it just because we have the South, that now we have this new building that we have to, is that why we're like, we don't have the funding to pay for new teachers? So that's why we have to hurry this situation on so that we don't have to hire new teachers and we can shift? Because that's kind of what it feels like. Is, because why the rush then?
I have said before, that what this proposal is designed to do is not a silver bullet. It won't fix everything it just doesn't make everything whole. I 100% believe that it will provide a better experience and an education for all of our kids. That I believe. There is no silver bullet. It's a step that needs to be taken, in my opinion. And again, Oak Park, pick your school. I mean, we have capacity deals. We have situations that need to be addressed.
So why can't admin get broken up then between 2 of the schools that have all this open space?
That doesn't address the programming and having 100 kids at one building, having 700 and having 1,000, give or take, 1,000 seats empty at 9 elementary schools.
When you think of that 1,000, when you think about this and the idea of consolidating 3 schools into our current schools, taking our West Campus programs and the central services and putting it in our schools, and we still have space. 1,000 seats is a lot of room, so with all that, to be able to move that number of students and the West Campus programs, which aren't seats or spaces, and the central service, there's a lot of space in our building. You've had your hand up for a long time.
So, we've been talking a lot about programming, but programming is really just a piece of special ed. As Nate will tell you, I am a frequent flyer in many of these meetings and very familiar with the budget cuts and how they've impacted staff, and greatly appreciative of the great staff here at Oak Park. But size and scale of these smaller schools offer a whole bunch to your special needs students that will be eliminated and can't be made up by a few extra hours of staff time. Provided the cost benefit analysis of your proposal and some other proposals. You need to assume, for example, that not every student is gonna stay in the district. How many students can you lose and break even with this proposal? When do you start losing money?
I'd say we're losing money right now by, we have lost money by not doing it.
But we're not talking about money, Keith,
No, but if the question is money, how do I possibly address the question without them saying we're not talking about money?
I have a
That,
question
that's, I
about
can't
that.
address a money question without talking about
Hold
money.
on, Sharon.
Facilities question. One, I saw a newspaper article with Ms. Pantelli where she indicated the impetus for all of this was finding a place for central services. Can you please elaborate on, I looked in the long-range facilities plan, I didn't see it in there. Why is the need to move that? You know, a lot of corporations are moving to a dispersed headquarters role in order to see their administrators get closer to their staff, see the day-to-day. With remote working and other things, there are lots of ways that could be done. It's really easy to lease office space. You can't easily repurpose a school building. Almost all of these buildings are in residential zoning areas. They're not appropriate for office space. They're not appropriate for lots of loading. So it seems to me a lot easier from a land use perspective to maintain the schools and move the offices, which, you know, there's plenty of office space for lease. And so if your projections for demographics are wrong, which I think you should acknowledge that most projections are, and predicting the future is hard. And so it's much easier to move administrative out of classes and move them into an office than it is to rebuild or repurpose a school building.
When talking about how the conversation started and what Denise had said was, as we started looking, because one of the considerations was, again, does central services move into a building because we have space? That was presented last year, we heard that. Does central...
Please tell me the context in which that was presented.
The context would be the long-range facility plan. As they were working through the plant structures, one of the conversations was, should central services move into a building? Not central services will, should central services move into a building? Let's look at that further beyond last May. As we looked at that further, again, I will stand behind, central services does not need to move. It doesn't. We're not doing this to create a space for central services. It can stay where it is. And so that is, in my mind, that is a very different conversation than we have space at our buildings for kids. We just don't have the kids to fill the buildings.
So then why are we taking these northern schools and transferring them down here, or this is the proposal, we're gonna bring all these kids down here, we're gonna build a school down south. Why can't we why do we have to build this school and put all this money into this new school when we can bring them up here and fill up our schools?
Exactly. Right.
Why can't
Why
we
is
fill
it
up our
okay to
schools?
move
Why
that?
do we have to build a new one?
So just with
It
that,
just seems common sense.
25 million, 1.2
well,
million.
so remember that what Kristen had said earlier is the school in the south, the new school that's part of that bond, is to move our Valley Crossing students over. And then many of you, if you've spent some time in Lake Elmo Elementary, we have 765 students in that school, which is too much. So if the students move over, our students, they're our kids, move over from Valley Crossing, and we alleviate some of the overcrowding at Lake Elmo, that school is full. So that helps our kids for Valley Crossing, and it helps our Lake Elmo. But, you know, as Kristen said earlier, we don't have to move central services. The thought to move central services was, we have all of these spaces that are going to be empty. Moving central services here would save money, and if we would need this as a contingency plan down the road for something, we could have this space and move back into an office space. We can share with you, I mean, I know it's difficult for folks to think that we aren't going to get a neighborhoods or population growth, and I wish we were. I mean, you know, I think any one of the board members or administration or principals would say, you know, I would love to be able to turn to Nate and say, you know what, something is going to change and we aren't gonna have to do this. Nobody wants to do this. But we also have to look at how we're using our resources, and we've said time and time again, because we've cut and cut and cut, instead of cutting teachers, instead of cutting programs, that we'd like to look at what our spaces look like. So we don't have to move central services. It was just a way of trying to have this building be a community space where we would maybe have early childhood, adult basic education, some of those services that folks have been asking for that we haven't had a spot for, so.
You're basically gonna have to give these buildings away, so to sell them in advance of expected lack of growth doesn't make any sense. You could actually, you know, just give them away after the lack of growth has finally eventuated. Why would you preemptively give the buildings away? Just strategically.
We would, I'm confused because the proposal would never be, we wouldn't be looking to sell this building.
And I'll say it again, the schools that you're getting rid of, you say you're gonna get rid of them because in the future there supposedly is not gonna be any growth, right? That's kind of like one of the main pillars of your plan. And these buildings, I think we can all agree, they're not gonna bring a lot of money into the district when we sell them, right? No one's gonna really give us $20 million for each of these things. So why would we give them away now on the crystal ball of no growth in the future? Why not wait till oh right, there has been no growth in the future, you know, now it's 2020, and hey, you're right, everybody's left the north, let's get rid of these buildings at that point.
In regards to, even, let's just take the furthest north, because that's the easiest example. With Marine, you're looking at a building capacity of, let's say, a couple hundred kids. There is no indication, just for Marine, there's zero indication that Marine is going to have growth. Just, and honestly, their lot sizes and whatever don't attribute to
Is
that.
there indication that it's gonna go down?
Growth and
State
contraction are
demographer's
two
office
things.
completely says 65, like 25% of those houses are gonna turn over because people are aging
Yes.
out.
I'm gonna say
So
something
you can't
here.
assume those people aren't going to maybe have some babies.
So maybe it's time just to address that, because
Let
that
me
seems to
finish
be
one
the
more
thing
comment on
that's.
this. One thing I hear you guys say a lot is, I'm 100% certain, and I guarantee, and I'm sure of this, and the lady over here said there's no data for any of this. And anybody in business would never say I'm 100% sure of anything.
I don't
They'd
recall
say,
saying
you know,
that.
we've looked at the data and it seems like it's leading more to the right or the left, but I mean, you just said you're 100% sure.
I don't believe I said it. Well, with no growth in Marine, maybe that,
No,
we're
it was
talking
about 15 minutes ago, you said you're 100% sure. And
in
it's like
regards to, I'm sorry.
that if you do this, something about all the kids in our district will have a better education.
No, I said that's what I believe.
Yeah. but you-
That's my belief. That's my personal opinion.
I'm wondering with the data piece, I'll address the demographic, unless someone, I mean,
We'll let you answer some questions.
I could, but I mean, it's hard to answer questions when you get interrupted all the time, right? Just saying. So, with regard to the data stuff, here's what I would put out there. Like many of you, I've spent time researching data, right? Because I get to present the demographics that are out there. So, when you look at Hazel Reinhardt's study, which people feel like they want to rip apart, what we need to look at with the data is how accurate is she? And so when you look at Hazel Reinhardt's data, and let's start with past data, her projection for this year of where how many kids were going to be in this district, as of August 1, was off by 7 kids. That's just a starting point. I went back because people wanted to suggest that because of her misprojections for Robbinsdale, that's why they're in the turmoil that they're in. So I went back to Hazel and I said, Hazel, help me understand this, because people are questioning this. And this is the information I'm presenting, right? And then, so I went back to that, and Hazel was off by, give or take, I think it was 400. I could get the number for you because I have the direct quote for it. Between the original projections that she gave for Robbinsdale and where they ended up in that time frame. Robbinsdale has since asked her back to do more projections. What is left out of the Robbinsdale story is that in addition to closing schools, The boundaries around them stopped allowing open enrollment, and so the kids had nowhere to go. They opened up a brand new ALC, which added more kids into their district, along with a couple other schools. So my only point with that part of it is, I understand entirely that this is an emotional thing. Absolutely get that. But to simply say that our data's wrong, our data's wrong, your data's wrong, I think that's a little short-sighted. To suggest that we're not doing research and we haven't shown data, I've spent hours poring over data for my part of this. And further on that, I have double-checked the data, and the next thing is the Met Council. I talked directly to the Met Council, and here's what I asked them. Here's what I'm reading into your projections. Please tell me if I'm reading them wrong, because I have people suggesting I'm reading them wrong. I will tell you that I made a mistake at the board meeting in what I said with regard to people per household versus population. I will admit that was a mistake to say that. However, I will also tell you that the graph that was up was correct. But what Met Council told me was that I was reading their data correctly. Now, I understand that projections can be wrong. Absolutely. I'm not trying to suggest, and to your point, I'm not trying to suggest that I am 100% correct. All I can tell you is that between talking in person to the Lake Elmo planners, to the City of Stillwater planners, to the City of Hugo planners, to giving Hazel Reinhardt our most recent enrollments from 14-15 and have her recalculate it for me, and talking to Met Council, everyone that does this stuff for a living, because I'm not a demographer, and I can't tell you how they calculate it. It's not my deal. Everyone is saying the same thing. And the same thing is this, and it's the same thing that was said back when the original capacity study was done. We are going to experience little to no student enrollment growth in the north. The growth is going to happen in the south. What is confusing for people and was confusing for me is this. Our population is going to go up. The population itself is going to increase. The people per household is going to decrease. The age of the people buying the houses that are already on the market are not going to be what they were. And that is the start of how your population goes up as a whole. There's going to be more of us, but the population that's producing our kindergarten kids isn't going to be going up substantially. And so that's where they get the numbers from. So
I want to talk about the bond. April 6, 2015, in the Stillwater Gazette, we had description of proposed school construction project. And we have Marine, Withrow, and Oak Park Elementary listed here. Marine has 171 allotted to it. Withrow has 171 allotted to it. Oak Park has 1,600,000 allotted to it. And we have here that the school board believes that they will have sufficient resources to fund the increase in costs associated with the proposed facility expansion, and that the proposed projects are in the best interest of the district. So I'm wondering if you're using the same data now that you're using then, and I do have, that was just kind of a side question, but I do have three main questions. What has changed between then and now? And how will the bond funds be, that were allotted to those particular schools be spent if the bond proposal, or if the bold proposal gets passed? And then how will moving of central services be funded and renovations be funded if the bold proposal goes through?
Seeing that's a finance question, I believe I'll address it.
I suppose, yes.
The first question was, does it hold true that the school board believes, or that there is a belief that there is enough operational cost to support the infrastructure in which was voted on, right? That's the first question.
Yes, they believed that they had sufficient resources to fund the increase in costs.
Absolutely, that hasn't changed. Again, the new elementary school is funded by the switch of of the Valley Crossing kids going there. The high school expansion and the operational cost is funded by the ALC moving over, so that holds to be true. The second question is?
So, and we have Marine, Withrow, and Oak Park are also listed here, so they would have, they would believe they would have sufficient resources to fund these, I would believe, too, and any increase in costs associated with with expansions there, such as the pre-K that were discussed, and the new art rooms, and, new bathroom in Marine, and, so I was wondering what has changed between then and now? Like, all of a sudden, you know, this pretty picture that was painted in the bond proposal went out to voters and asked for money. And so to me, this is about money. What has changed? Because our Marine, Withrow, and Oak Park are showing on this list.
That's true, and that's for facility improvements, and so Oak Park is scheduled to have HVAC, heating and ventilation going into the buildings this summer.
Is that for central services?
Your kids will be in the building next year.
For 1 year.
I know.
Why are we gonna put that money in if they're not gonna be here for one more year?
You have to
Let's just
realize
throw
we've
it.
had kids have to take standardized tests in rooms that are 98 degrees for years, so that's just sore. So
I
that's
understand
not
that. I
personal, it's just experiential.
Taxpayers are paying $100,000 for playground improvements at this school for no children to play here. Are the central services people gonna be playing out there?
Well,
I don't know what's happening.
No, I understand. There's many facets to it. First off, the question, you know, what does this building look like after? Is it still open? I mean, I honestly would love to see the gym still open. I'd love to see early childhood programs in here. I'd love to see whatever pre-K. I mean, what is the building going to look like? So just to presume it's only going to be administration housed here, I don't know if we can quite make that leap yet. What happens to the money that was said was going to go to, you know, a playground surface at, let's say, Marine or Withrow? Because those buildings, there is no projection for anything to happen to that. There are a few different methods, I believe, that could happen. Should those buildings close, either we look and say, you know, of the playground surfaces, which is about $100,000 per site, we just give that back to the taxpayers. That's $200,000, and we choose to say, you know what, we're not making those improvements, those buildings aren't there, and therefore that would go back to the taxpayers. That could be a choice. There could be another choice to say, do we modify, because a review and comment goes to the Department of Education, of which the Department of Education approves to allow the bond, or the referendum to go to vote. Because it was a projection, and I am not certain if it was written in its entirety in the review and comment, I haven't seen it, but it might have been an attachment. Do we go to the Department of Education with a modified review and comment and say, there wasn't a playground surface set for somewhere else, or we needed more money, can we reallocate it to existing buildings? There's different options. We're not, the school board hasn't even been presented with those options, because a decision needs to be made even on the buildings before we move forward on what is the appropriate method for the money that was allocated for those particular projects to be spent or not spent.
So I just wanna point out one thing, and I just wanna point out, this is like about Marine, I know this is an Oak Park one, but I do wanna say that there was a part that says, be assured that we will keep the important Marine traditions alive. The bond will be approved, and we will still have our school. There's something very wrong about how this bond was set up. And we had all of our pretty elementary schools lined up, and there was something for everyone in it to vote for. Everyone could see their school on there and get their friends out to vote for this bond. And now, some of the people's schools are being pulled away. And so just giving the money back to taxpayers, that doesn't really do it for me.
I'm just saying that's, I mean, you asked how it would be addressed, I was just saying that was an option, I thought we could have.
We've got several people that haven't spoken yet, so, Amy, go ahead.
I just want to talk a little bit about why Oak Park. I hear you say a lot about here's what's happening in the northern part of the district, but Oak Park's in the middle of town, and our population is really determined by the boundaries that the school district set. So if you want a bigger Oak Park population, you move the boundaries. So the arguments that you give why this proposal makes sense aren't really about Oak Park. I think many of us, our major concern is about the low-income kids at Oak Park, and I think that the way the numbers have been displayed so far kind of hide that a little bit, because if you if you add the gate kids and the district-wide programming in with everybody else, that gets lost a little bit. So I'm really worried about that. I think that that's short-sighted, that there's gonna be a lot of kids that fall through the cracks, and you're gonna regret that this is really the place that a lot of kids rely on for a lot of just, life stuff. And I don't think, it doesn't seem like you've had time to really think about that, and to really study that, and to talk to those folks and the teachers that work with those folks and figure out how you're gonna make sure they don't fall through the cracks. So I wanna hear more about why Oak Park, why not Anderson, why not Lily Lake? I mean, I don't want any school to close, but I wanna know why here. I think that we're the only walkable school that you can walk to, both elementary school and junior high. People buy houses in this neighborhood to walk to school and feel really strongly about that. And I think that's gonna become a bigger priority a few years from now, and then we're gonna all be talking about the money we need for walkable schools. And so I just feel like this was too soon for Oak Park. Marine and Withrow have been on the radar screen for those reasons, for the low enrollment reasons for a long time, but this was too rushed for all of the particular reasons about Oak Park that I feel like are getting lost in the discussion.
Thank you for that statement, and I'm gonna turn this over to Bob because he states it better than I do, but I would like to say this, and it was brought up at the public hearings, and unfortunately, we don't, all of our conversations that happen behind the scenes, unfortunately, it's almost impossible to get out every way we do it. We wholeheartedly recognize the Section 8 housing and the challenges that presents. We do. So I would just like to say that. It might not feel that way, it might not seem that way, but please know we weren't blind to that. That's my piece of why, because I've heard it, and we know it. I mean,
but what are you gonna do about it?
Right. Why Oak Park? I wanna know why Oak Park.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too.
A couple of the things that we heard when we were at the public forum was one that, how will our parents be able to volunteer, or how will they get to conferences if they're at a different school? I visited with Ben Davis. Ben said, Denise, we already have volunteer checks for our families. They can ride the bus to and from and volunteer. For $85, I can run a bus all night back and forth for the transportation. The snack packs was another thing that came up. It's like, well, our families do the snack packs. Well, at least I know one of our board members delivers those snack packs at multiple schools. So all of those support things, we currently do those in other schools too. So those would all continue. That would all be part of what we'd want to do. Part of the conversation about having this building, not shuttering it down, was to provide some of those services that families might want. And what we're hearing from our early childhood director, or early childhood and community ed, Annette Salmon, is that people are asking to have adult basic ed, people are asking for adult EL classes, people are asking for early childhood, the possibility of having a kindergarten here if we want. Those things are all possible in this building, and so that's
brand new.
We do, but it's right about accessibility, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing, is that, why we like part of why this building is, it's accessible, right? People can walk across the street. So those are, it goes back to, Oak Park isn't closing because we're moving central services here. The 3 schools we're looking at consolidating is because we don't have enough kids.
Our boundaries
And boundaries is a shuffle. You can move kids around, but you're still.
Can I give a quote from a parent that it goes to Lily Lake? Her children were walking to school on Monday, and she said, "We were scared to death walking along Highway 5 because we don't have sidewalks. The roads were icy, and my kids got their ankles cut up by the snow because we had to walk in the sidewalks." There was a photo posted of parents dropping their kids off at Lily Lake where the cars got stuck on the hill, and their kids were getting out mid-hill and walking because parents couldn't get their cars up the hill. So I'm just saying, practicality, this is a great school to walk to. It's an easy school for commuters to come to. When you look at the location of Lily Lake, and I'm not going to peg one school or another, but when you start weighing the pros and cons, you can shuffle around the district. That school's a mile from here, so it's not like those kids are going to have to travel farther. I want to know what the pros and cons are of how you weighted one school over another. If we close Lily Lake, let's make a pros and cons list. Let's do a budget analysis, a risk analysis. Let's look at all of the schools for the special ed program or all the special services, because I really wanna know, what is our cost, future state, to provide all of the services that we're promising with Bold? Because if we don't have funding with it, it's a hope that a lot of us have that it will work. But if we don't have funding to support Bold and we close all these schools and we're back to where we are today, we're not any better. And we're 3 schools short. I just,
So what facility things did you compare in selecting the Stillwater, what is Stonebridge, Lily Lake versus Oak Park? Between those 3, why did you choose Oak Park from a facilities, let's just start with that, from a facility standpoint, why us?
From a facilities standpoint, when you look at, well, first of all, when you look at, if you're going to move central services, if that's one of the things you're going to do and move that in, and if you're going to incorporate into that community education, if you're going to have something that, and this was brought up by a community member at one of the open forums, actually against it, which was odd, is having something that's on the bus line for adults. So when you're just talking facilities, you know, it's things like that that come into play. The other piece of it, which doesn't, you hit on it, it doesn't change anything between this and Lily Lake, really is a central location, if you're using those 2 schools, right? Because Lily's in the middle, the Oak Park is in the middle. So from a facilities standpoint, those are really the starters to that, is what's the facility setup for access that we believe was more accessible for everything from moving central services in and community ed and the additional space that could be used, for example, the gym space, the playground space.
What about expansion room? What is the property size difference between Lily Lake and Oak Park? My guess would be we have a lot more land mass. Should we need to expand this school? Is that the case?
I would think so.
I would think so too.
Did you, sorry, one more question. Did you also take into consideration the, I'm trying to think, the identity of this town and Stillwater, and that we are known as one of America's prettiest painted places, most picturesque towns. There's 130-some heirloom homes within the boundaries of just this Oak Park building facility, and the fact that we are a town whose predominant industry is tourism. I'm very concerned that closing a school in that most beautiful South Hill historic part in the heart of Stillwater could negatively affect those downtown businesses and those families who would want to move to a neighborhood like this, which could then in turn affect our local economy.
Yep.
Did you think about that at all? Then you don't know this town, you don't know Stillwater, you have no clue what you guys are talking about.
I just said yes, you know, part of.
Sorry.
What I just would like to point out
A little
too,
fired up.
I get that you're fired up, but
Yeah.
please understand, I live here too. I
It
voted
doesn't
for the
feel
bond,
like
I
you
have
guys
kids in
live
the
here,
school
though. That's the
system.
problem. It doesn't feel like, it feels like you live in Woodbury and you're completely dissing the north side of the school district. You have to admit that that's how it feels to spend $25 million in the south and close 3 schools in the north. Excuse me.
You know, we can't choose where families live and move and where they're building.
But
And
is
I
there
heard you say
data on
earlier-
historic, there's obviously data for new construction, is there data for our older
The
towns?
data, when you look at it, and that's part of, you know, we can show you again, but the beautiful historic homes, they are gorgeous. And I would love to say that
Crumble when
young
you discourage
family.
people from living here.
Right, and a lot of people moved here from out of town. She did, I did, because I wanted this.
And there's a lot of
Not
families,
this.
a lot of people that have, that went to school in the Stillwater area, they've moved away. They're moving back now to Stillwater because they wanna raise their families here. I did. I lived in Stillwater, I moved out of town, had my baby girl, wanted to raise her in Stillwater. I chose this school. I came back, there's a lot of families coming back to raise their kids.
So I guess I'd ask them to share that data with us, because when we're talking to all the folks that Bob had shared earlier, I mean, our intention is to get the closest number and have, yes, you can't project perfection, you know, but to get the numbers to look at about what that growth might be. And if we were seeing growth,
But
we
isn't
would
that data
say,
skewed, cause there's not, is there, I'm asking this question, is there data to show what happens for turnover in a historic neighborhood? Obviously, there's data to show new construction,
Right.
but is there data to help prove that all of us are here and moving here for that reason? I don't think there is, so
If you look at the state demographer's
Is there?
office, for
Okay.
the turnover rate, we are second highest on the chart in this part of
Good, there's
Stillwater.
data.
Marine and Afton are tied with having the most people at 65 about to turn over, which would mean or indicate that families will be moving in. And the biggest problem I had with the data wasn't that Hazel's a bad person. It's that it was 2010 data that was trended out for 10 years, so it's only gonna be 4 years worthy when you enact bold. And secondly, if you're doing facility planning, and my husband does it for a living, that's one of the reasons he's a little hot under the collar about this, he does facility planning all over for universities and all sorts of educational facilities. It's a 25-year deal. People live in their homes 25 years. When you're looking at neighborhood turnover, it's typically a 25-year cycle, not a 10-year cycle that's old already.
And we have a big district. Our district includes Marine on the St. Croix. We have to support the
Right.
size of our
Yeah.
district and where our people are.
So to that point, this gets back to kind of what you were talking about. The balance, I guess I would ask people to try and understand is, while it's personal for each school and each community, remember that point, that as an administration, maybe what you're feeling from us is that we have a responsibility to all 18 communities that we're servicing as a whole, right? And so, but the problem with that, when we're looking at it from that angle, is that it may have the tendency for you in this instance to feel impersonal.
I'm not affected personally. My son will already be at the junior high who goes here. My daughter has special needs, so she has to go to Lake Elmo Elementary. So I'm pissed as a taxpayer, and I'm concerned because of what I do for a living. I promote this town, so thank you for all the free negative press lately. I'm concerned about that you don't understand the virtue of the uniqueness of this town, and that is frustrating to me, so.
We've
I'm
got-
wondering
we've got
about,
several people that haven't talked.
I was gonna say, there's a gentleman.
I'm wondering if, after all those hearings last week, if you've taken into consideration anything that you heard as far as people making alternative suggestions, because tonight all I'm hearing is the same
Right.
things. And it's really frustrating to me. I mean, I've been thinking about this all day today, about this point, and you sound like you're, I don't know if upset is the right word, but you were talking about, well, I've done my research too. Well, so has a lot of people who are extremely intelligent out in this community. So don't discount that. I mean, I feel like if your numbers were so strong, there wouldn't be any questions. We wouldn't even have this meeting because your plan would just be rock solid and we'd all say, yay, let's do it. So there's obviously problems.
what options are you referring to? I mean, we can share with you some of the options that
We've
folks
talked
have.
about, I personally talked and brought up the idea of marketing. Everything's like doomsday. Why aren't we talking about, if we bring preschools in, marketing, seeing how that will play out, and then with that, marketing to the people who have brought their kids to other schools. Why the rush? Why can't, if it's not about money, then why don't we have the time to let it ride out and see what happens?
Yeah, one of the plans is there's 3,000 children in the community, and that's one of the points that have chosen to go elsewhere. And why, instead of throwing in the towel, why not find out why they went elsewhere and focus our attention on that as a plan?
You know,
Number two would be the fact with the pre-K, that's gonna take time. So that's gonna build retention right there, you know, when you have kids introduced early on. So I think that'll lead to growth.
You know, unfortunately, Krista Keister, who is our marketing person, was unable to be in attendance tonight. She was feeling under the weather, but I will say what she spoke about at the Stonebridge PTA meeting was the marketing piece, and I think Chris has been here 7 years, give or take. She's been here 7 years, and her task for most of those years has been trying to work on marketing and promote the product. Now, this is independent of the pre-K, it's just the marketing piece of it. And what she said was, it is very hard to market a school district that pretty much annually is having budget cutting conversations every spring. That is a very hard thing to market and promote, to get kids to either stay with us or come back to us, or, so to
But you
allow
wanna
time.
market schools that are, we're closing down 3 schools, you're gonna market that? That's gonna make things
You're
easier?
gonna market the programs.
You're gonna lose all your top families
And,
that
and
you're
you're gonna
promoting.
lose a lot of people, so when you, each student that leaves, that's a $10,000 loss, so you can say we're not talking finances, but we are, but we're not, we're talking programs, so, you know.
Well, so many of them are interrelated, right? And to your point, what you said earlier about why don't we ask, we have asked. And as I shared earlier, before I even started, I went to ask our St. Croix Prep and our parochial schools, their parents. Some of the board members know that I did this. They were in attendance to sit down and talk with parents about what wasn't working. And what wasn't working was they didn't have math or reading intervention support for their kids. They didn't have the special education support that they needed. You know, it was based around the programming and also the large class sizes. So those were the 2 big things I heard from those groups. So if we're going to help that, we have to figure out a way to do that, right? And we've been cutting for 10 to 15 years in those 2 areas.
Why are those kids from St. Croix Catholic and Salem Lutheran coming here for interventionists then? If they're leaving because they're not.
Yeah,
getting
we
it.
went there, they don't have any special ed there. I mean, my kids came here because none of their needs
She
were
just,
met.
just to clarify, she was speaking about St. Croix Prep, and
Yeah.
we don't service any kids from St. Croix Prep.
But
We
even-
do, I just wanted to clarify that, we do service from Salem.
Kids are speech kids only. We're legally required to provide service for the parochial schools.
I know, but my kids were at St. Croix Catholic, my son was very bright, he had attention. I know another kid right now who is like super anxious, and I'm sorry about anybody who likes that school, but none of our needs were met. They were very inappropriately answered, and when we came here, that is why I rave about this school, because all my kids are happy with the services that they have. And I think our school is doing an exceptional job. That's all.
I have a question. Why close 3 schools and you could just close 1 school? Why would you wanna close 3 schools?
We don't want to close any schools, but when you look at the big package, and what we're trying to do is, we need more kids. You need to bring more kids into our district, so we don't have to do that.
Can I just offer something? So I've had the chance over the last few weeks just to meet with, as I know other board members have as well, a lot of different parents from all over our community. And I just really want to validate that there is a deep sense of loss about this proposal. Absolutely. I don't think any of us are disputing that. And the reality is that for a lot of people, there seems to be a lot of loss and no realized gain or tangible gain, saying like, what will I get, what will my kid get? And I think that's real, that's legitimate, and I acknowledge that. I think that as Superintendent Pontrelli and our team have alluded to, we have charged them with a task to look at all 8,400 of our kids. And the reality is, in talking to teachers, and talking to staff, and talking to administrators like Mr. Cox, our teachers right now do not have the systems and structures to serve all of our kids. And so many of our kids are being underserved. And given the financial realities of our district, with the declining enrollment, with the low capture rate, all of that has an impact. And I'm not saying that this is like Kristen said, is this going to solve everything? Absolutely not. We're probably still going to have to look at some other adjustments to be made. I think that, maybe that's on us as a board, not maybe engaging in enough truth telling to say, hey, this is really where we're at, and these are the kids that we're not serving. And that our teachers are amazing, but they are needing more supports, more systems in place. Our administrators would love to just be about the work, not having to think, okay, what teachers, what nurses, what special eds, services, what people do I have to cut this year? And that's been the reality, the 10 of the last 15 years. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Orion's been holding Dad's hand up there for a while. Thanks, bud.
I have a few points I'd like addressed.
Everyone has talked about the demographics here being financially not the greatest for a lot of the parents here. But yet we have a school that is consistently performing above average. Where are we gonna find that when we shut this down and move it somewhere else? That is in no small part because of the efforts of the people in this community that's happening. And that is going to be more than challenging to try to recreate somewhere else. And I hear you talking about closing these schools and having more resources. If we're not adding additional staff, we still have the same amount of staff per student here. This is not, I mean, we could argue a number of ways on that. I'm not sure that we're gaining a lot with that. And what we're proposing to do, you know, I work 2 jobs. I'm doing a lot of work. I'm consulting at one place. I'm doing precision metrology at another. And I've not had a chance to dig into every last thing that you publish. What I have seen is a lot of PowerPoint slides and a lot of buzzwords and not a huge amount of substance. The first black belt mentor I ever had said, "In God we trust, everyone else brings data." I have seen data. Now, this county, we are blessed with some of the lowest property taxes in the area. And I voted in a heartbeat to up those taxes a little bit to help support these schools. I would have done it again. But quite simply, with this proposal, is something that was completely different than what I said I was shelling out extra money for. So really, with that here, how well can I trust that I'm going to see any follow through with this when I didn't see follow through the last time? My son Ryan here, he has flourished in this school system. The reason I am living here is because of this school system. And if I see things fall apart, and with the level of trust that you're creating here, you know, I don't know what to think about the future. I have a huge skill set that I get calls every week asking me to go and move in other places of the country. I don't even look at them because of how well my son is doing in this school and in this school district. If that is going to significantly change, what's holding me in this area is gone.
I think you nailed it on the head at the very end well, several points, so I don't mean to say that, but our intention is to really have a strong school district. And, you know, what Paula had shared earlier is a bunch of things. I mean, really, you know, our job is to look at all 8,300 some students. And yes, we care about each and every school. We care about the communities for all of the schools. Looking at the data and the demographics and how our kids achieve, they aren't, you know, if you look at our reading achievement data, 30% of our kids are not reading. It's not working for them. So we can't say that our schools are doing what they need to for 30% of our kids. We have to look at doing something differently than we have the last 10 to 15 years. And not one of us would argue that Oak Park isn't an awesome place for kids to learn. Marine is an awesome place for kids to learn, and so is Withrow. All of them have strong communities. And I've shared with some of you before, one of the things that I hear, it doesn't matter what school I'm in. It doesn't matter if I'm Marine, if I'm here, if I'm Lake Elmo, if I'm at Afton Lakeland, if I'm at the high school. Our families believe at their school that their school is the best. Their principals are the best. Their kids and families and communities are the best. So, you know, I think that's a testament to our communities pulling together and helping support their schools. The other piece is we have a lot of families who choose to go to other schools, right? At the very beginning tonight, I shared with you that Afton Lakeland keeps 70% of its kids, but 30% choose to go to other places in our schools. We look at Stonebridge. Stonebridge keeps half, and half go to other schools. So we already have many of our students choosing to go to other schools. We already have many students, you know, I think part of, with Oak Park, I think it was like 700 kids maybe this building used to have. And what's your enrollment right now?
461.
461. If we take out 100 kids for GATE, that's 361. And then we take out our ASD program, you can see that the numbers start going. And then we look at...
That's just boundaries though.
Then
I
we
mean, the
look
boundaries
at,
change, right?
then we look at the number of kids from the district who are boundary here and how many choose to go to other schools for different things. My point is that we have really good schools and we have teachers who are working really hard to give your kids the best education that they can. And it's not working for some of them because they don't have the support and resources that they like, and class sizes are too high.
So why
And
punish
so-
the ones who it is working
Just a
for?
second. Jenny, you've had your hand raised for a while.
Thank you, my arm's getting so I want to go back to something that was discussed earlier, because I feel as if I still haven't heard the question answered. Now, not everybody's a teacher, so to remove the kind of teacher speak, exactly how many hours, and I'm asking for hours, of extra services are you guaranteeing or promising as a result of this proposal going through? That's my first thing. So I guess that's just a one-word answer. So do you have that?
The actual hours,
The
we
actual
don't have
hours
an
are
actual
just-
breakdown of hours.
Can you email it to me?
You can, if you watch tomorrow night, we're gonna do a breakdown of what the services look like, and that's part of Rachel's.
It's gonna be dependent upon what exactly the services are and how many kids they service. As you know, being an educator, it isn't as simple as saying, you're gonna move this person here and they're gonna service 25 kids for this amount of time.
So that brings me
But
to my
she'll
next
show
question.
you the results
That's great.
of
I'll see that.
consolidating the three, how that will make an impact on the rest.
Okay. So my next question kind of mixes in with that one. So you're saying that obviously you can't guarantee the number of kids in a school. So you're saying we're going to have these schools, these big schools or bigger schools, and you're going to maybe put one staff member to those schools. Now, children don't come necessarily, my kid did, but don't necessarily come into a school with a diagnosis. They get diagnosed as they go along, and they get undiagnosed at the same time. So how can you say that you will have one person there, because that person's allocated hours is dependent on how many children have that diagnostic need.
Right.
You're
That's,
talking
that's our point.
But
Is-
no, it's not though, because you could have enough kids in one school and it's only 0.8. Or in another school, it's 1.2. So that's one person plus another 0.2. So you're still going to end up with specialists split between schools depending on the needs of every single individual school. That's where I'm kind of losing my belief in this whole thing.
So,
If that
a
makes
couple of
sense.
things. If we were talking specifically about special education,
Mhm.
where our special education teachers are assigned a caseload and you've got specific numbers like that for everything, then yes, that would hold true. But when we're talking about things like, as Nate alluded to earlier, other services that are auxiliary services such as student advocates or Read With Me or any of those interventionists, those aren't necessarily assigned specifically by a percentage of kids that need them. It's more important that we provide access to kids when they need those services, as you suggested, that flow in and out.
With that, sorry, what happens then if you have the instance where you've got a school that has more need for the reading programs, for the maths programs, than another school? Would you then shift the specialist between them? Or would you just say, no, sorry, you have one specialist and that's all the help you're getting?
No, you wouldn't say that, but what you would be able to say is that at a minimum, you do have this much service in every building.
So it might be that some children are still being under-serviced. Depending on which
We
school
do,
they're going
we
to.
do look at the data each year when assessments that kids do in the winter and spring, and are able to make some projections about number of students that might need some intervention services, and so then those can be looking to make some shifts at the end of the school year in planning for the next year. It's never perfect, But that is a little part of something that we do is making projections about kids that will need the services, knowing that there will always be some students that need some more that we didn't know about, so. Kylie?
I've been at the school for 7 years, and I got into the GATE program in 5th grade, and so not all GATE kids just come from different schools. And how is closing 3 schools strengthening and bringing kids into our district?
Let me take this one. So what we've heard again is that even with GATE, is that in the past, so you're in seventh grade? Sixth grade?
Sixth grade.
So you've seen the GATE program over the last couple of years when you've been there. There used to be Joe Tate, did you know Mrs. Tate? So she was a coordinator and she supported your teachers and she supported the other cluster programs at the other schools. She's no longer here. And why isn't she no longer here? Because budget cuts. And so she was there to support your teachers, to help support you and the programming. She's gone. So I would have to say, as we start looking at how we might use our resources differently, we'd like to have someone to help support that and give more of the support that's gone. That's one way that we hope that people will choose to stay or come back to Stillwater. The other piece is kind of what I shared earlier, is the thing that we consistently hear, and you know, I know I sound like a broken record, but believe me, the broken record has been coming this way, saying class sizes are too big and we don't have the resources we want for our kids. So we're hoping that when we have those and parents can see that our class sizes are not as out of the range as in the past and their kids are getting more support, they'll want to stay, because we have a number who choose to leave each year. That increases each year. That'll stay or either, come back.
Bruce?
I'm sorry, I've heard the question asked a couple of different times, a couple of different ways. I think Amy was the first one to ask it and others have touched on it. But really what I'm curious about is, what are the metrics of why Oak Park? And just focusing with laser precision on why Oak Park over, the other,
Anderson.
and I've heard Anderson, I've heard Lily, I've heard Stonebridge, but I'd like to see the data, I'd like to see the analysis, because we don't have it.
Lily Lake has more kids than Oak Park. We shared about facilities and looking at that. We shared about the other pieces, the Croywood area. Those homes are currently turning over faster than Stillwater. That may change, but right now that's what it looks like. The school is full, and I know it feels like Oak Park is full, but like we just shared a few minutes ago, we used to be 700. We moved the GATE program in because there was extra space. We moved the ASD program because there's extra space. There's more kids in Lily Lake also.
But isn't that just a matter of where you draw the boundaries, which you're going to redraw anyway?
Well, and Lily draws from Baytown. I mean,
And so does Oak Park. Oak Park captures 52%.
So again, it's more about the facility, right? I mean, what about this facility says this one no longer works for a neighborhood school, that we have to close this one over Stonebridge, over Anderson? I mean, what is it about this facility that makes it not viable or not the best option to keep open?
Can I just tie into your question? Has there been any additional new renovations to Lily Lake recently? Like, has there been any new? And I'm asking because if there hasn't been, if we haven't put money into there, but we just put a crap load of money into this school for lockers and new security, front office. We just put all this money into this school. So why can't we look at, and you someone brought up the safety factors with Lily Lake now. I do not want my child going there if I'm gonna get stuck on a hill, or, if kids are gonna be walking down the street with no sidewalks in the wintertime. That's not safe. It's not. I don't want my kid there. Do you? Okay, so if we're putting all this, we just put all this money into this school. So, and I don't wanna see any schools closed. But let's use the facilities that we just put this money into. I mean, it makes sense.
Well,
I'm
so
just,
going
I'm
back
trying to
to-
look
Let him
at.
answer, let him answer.
I would also, I think those are great questions, and I do want to hear the answers to, like, because we still haven't heard it, and I think that your question is getting at that, like, that's
Yes.
another piece of
Yeah,
why.
why this
Lily
school?
Lake did have, just to answer your question before we go to others, Lily Lake did have the same improvements here, new office, new security, new lockers, some of those things. Not major improvements like a new, wing or anything, but all of the schools had upgrades to security and,
But why not Anderson?
So what's the answer then, why? About our school specifically,
We
what?
never got a clear answer
Yeah.
why this school.
So was there a series of metrics that we
yeah,
looked
we
at
look
on
at
each
parameters
school?
for each, and so what would be the benefits and the risks of both of those. And the first one is really looking at the number of kids. Lilly has significantly more kids who are currently going to that building. Yes, we get that the Hill is a, bugger for people in January, this month.
What's the number?
Do you remember the number?
Just even during the summer, or, during the non-winter snowy months, there's no sidewalks, and those kids, I drive that way every day to go to work, and it's,
And, the capacity and the number of students was first. The second was if we were going to reuse this building as we're shuffling and looking at people, it was important to see if we could find something that was on a bus line and more central. Another piece was where was a place that we felt like the community might be able to use one of the schools for some of the community ed things that we had talked about. Shrinking enrollment here, the ability to move a GATE program. If we move GATE to the junior high, middle school, whatever you want to call it, for once we will actually probably be able to offer our GATE families transportation, which we haven't been able to in the past. So there were a number of things about the programs here and what could be at a different place. Could we move the ASD program here to another place and have a good place for those students? So it's about the number of kids and then the usability of all of the buildings.
So were all the facilities looked at? Like, was Anderson looked at with the same metrics? I mean, that they have a lower enrollment, lower capacity.
They have 358 kids. They actually have, if you take out the GATE and the ASD, they actually have more kids.
Capacity of the building
So what,
is bigger.
I mean, the challenge of this, what we did when we set out, and I know some of you have heard this on TV, I'm certain of it, is when we set out, we literally looked at every single building. And our charge was to create it came up even at open forum, and it was or the public hearings, and it was with Rose Knight. Your guys' proposal's over here, our parent group is over here, can't we meet somewhere in the middle? That was said, that statement was said. Our charge was to provide the most, what we believe to be the most efficient, i.e. capacity, what does that look like? Efficient, effective programming, money, what have you, that we could come up with. That was our charge. That's what we're setting out to do. As we work through the buildings, and we started with Lake Elmo, and we said, okay, what happens to those 765 kids? Because again, 1,000's 1,000, right? If we just move them, what does that look like? How do we make that work? What happens to the medically fragile? How do we push the kids south, north, is there space? And we literally went building by building to see how we could make it work. When you take just a smaller building in isolation, clearly you don't accomplish as much as you would by just doing a bigger building just because of the sheer number of kids that you could combine in a different spot. But part of the reason amongst all of the others that were listed is how did we come to this? How did we come to 3 buildings? Because that combination provided the best we could get to our charge. That's how. And then there's other considerations, because could it have just been a Stonebridge? It could have, sure it could have. Could it have just been a Withrow? Absolutely. Or just an Oak Park? Yes. Our charge was fill up the buildings as best you can, get the most efficiency out of it, get the level of programming out. I mean, that was our guiding principle, and that's how we came to where we are today. Every single building was looked at.
We do have a couple people that haven't been able to speak yet. Go ahead.
It's been mentioned about the special education and how we're not meeting our goals with reading. And my son needs reading help, and he has an IEP. And my question is, and I know you know this from our conferences, he couldn't be in the reading program he needed because he had an IEP. So moving him to a different school is gonna change that. He's also gonna get the help he needs because they have a student advocate. Because we had to take him out of speech just so he could get his reading, because it does not allow for both. And I don't see how that's helping it. So thinking that everybody who needs help with reading, going somewhere where they have an advocate is gonna help it, I don't see where it's gonna unless you change that. Is that being changed too?
And you're absolutely right, and that's the,
Special ed, special
those are the types of staffing and special ed scheduling things, not from a programming side, that we need to get better at.
Well, cause I think
Absolutely.
Oak Park had a really, really good solution for me, and they know my son, and they did what was best for him. And we have it set up that he's gonna be re-evaluated, and we took him out of speech because I feel reading is very important. But I haven't heard what's being done to change that, cause even if he stayed at Oak Park, you could change that. It doesn't mean that he needs a student advocate to change it, cause there's someone here who can do read with me, and he's in that. He didn't need an advocate to do that, he needed his teacher, his speech teacher, and Mr. Hawks, and they did that for him. And I'm afraid that isn't gonna happen when he goes to Lily Lake, which I don't even think my husband will let him go there. But if he goes there, I don't see that happening, that's not gonna follow him, what he's getting here with people who know it. But
And I can give you a general answer that in the buildings that I am in and seeing, I could have a mom from any one of those buildings give me the exact same story, that I'm getting this service because of the principal and the staff that are willing to work with me in that building. I absolutely agree with that, but not related to this piece, your student advocate piece, and the reading with a student that has special ed programming and that absolutely is a scheduling piece and working with the teachers and the principal of the building that your student's in.
well, he was getting the speech and reading, but he couldn't be in the program of reading he needed, so he was doing both, but Mr. Cox can explain why, I don't really know, but it was explained to me that if you have an IEP, you do not qualify for read with me. You can have other reading programs, but not read with me, which is what he needed, and he's excelled since he's been in there. So that's where the disconnect is, he may have a student advocate now, but he still can't do that. So when this hold goes through, you're gonna change that, so all the people who need reading, they're gonna be able to be in the programs they need even with an IEP.
Well, I still think you're talking about two different things. Once you have a student that's in an IEP, that's an entirely different conversation with regard to the services that they get.
It's, we've got the same thing.
I don't-
My
yeah.
kid does speech IEP, but they're not allowed to be part of the reading program. It's nothing to do with the amount of services that are available, teachers that are available, there's some sort of policy thing, or there's
But that could be affecting the numbers when you say we're not meeting our goals with reading. Part of it's because they're not in the programs they need to be in, that's not the school.
Yeah. Specifically with the Read With Me programming, program as a federally funded program that is, they do not, or excuse me, with the grant program that is, we are not allowed to, in order to meet the fidelity of the grant, we are not allowed to have students that are on any kind of an IEP, whether it is simply only speech related or that.
So I wonder
It
how
seems
much you tease that out changes the service then.
So Brenda.
I have a few things here. I'm just confused about a couple of things. At the board meeting on the 7th, I believe Shelley had asked if it's in the bond, does it have to happen? And it was stated yes. But I'm hearing from you tonight, Kristen, that if we're gonna close down Marine and we're gonna close down Withrow, we're not gonna make those playground upgrades. We're gonna give the money back to, we can give the money back to the taxpayers.
That's an option.
So I'm confused there because that's two entirely different answers.
So the intent behind it is bond money's for bond. We can't use that for operating costs. So to Shelley's question of, are the bond projects, is that what we're going to, yeah, absolutely. We need to use them for the bond projects. And you name any bond project, quite honestly, if we don't spend the money at the high school and there's a $3 million savings, we can't just allocate that somewhere else. That will go back to the taxpayers.
So it is possible to say, hey,
maybe we don't need to move those sixth graders just yet, maybe we just make the change of moving the ninth graders, because I think that's the context that question was asked in that night. Fair enough, I would say there's a significant difference between a $97.5 million project and $200,000 worth of adjustments, and a $97.5 million project and $30 million worth of adjustments. I think it would negate the whole, we're too far down the process to do that. There's minor adjustments that can be made, and if money isn't spent, it would go back to the taxpayers, but that would negate the whole bond, and we're too far down the road for that. Okay, and then, this kind of comes as a parent and a taxpayer. At that meeting, that same meeting, it was asked, how did we get here? And it started out with the Bridge to Excellence. We were a little optimistic on how much that would cost. We didn't quite plan for it that it's gonna cost as much as it does. Then we go on to and ask about the bond, and where are the capacity studies that supported this bond, and we hear that there weren't any. So now what I'm concerned about is we're going forward bold, and when we're asking these questions, how do we know what services are gonna be provided, you know, down the line? The questions we're asking, we're just kind of getting some general answers. We're not getting, like for example, when we ask about busing, off the top of my head, it could take, you know, the buses are gonna leave, or the junior high or the high school, and they're gonna go out to Marine, and they only have 45 minutes tops. So we're guesstimating that's gonna be 45 minutes. These are the answers I'm hearing, are things like this. So I'm quite concerned that we're going down the same road over and over and over again. We're not doing something new. We are implementing a large plan without doing all the planning that's needed. So I'm very, very concerned. I'm really ticked off when I'm at another school board meeting and I hear, well, you know, we just didn't really, we didn't quite figure out how much it's gonna cost to close these 3 schools. I believe the 2 answers we heard were, I don't know the inventory of the schools, and that's a one-time cost. Those are not, as a taxpayer, those are not adequate answers to my question. And so if we go down the same road, it's just not gonna be pretty. And I feel like that's what we're doing, because when we ask, why do we have to do this so fast? Why do we have to make this vote so fast? It's because we need the time to plan this. This is the answer we're hearing, and it's very frustrating and upsetting. I will say this, and I mean it as an apology. I do the best I can in a public forum to communicate the answers, given the context of the question. How I interpret a question could be very different than how others interpret my response. So that's, I mean, I had that conversation with a different individual that I can't present to possibly calculate for all interpretations that can occur. But I can do the best to answer the questions that you just laid out. As far as the referendum, the operating referendum and the Bridge to Excellence, and I came in on the tail of that. That's kind of when I started, and I didn't, you know, I wasn't really looking at the financial information and what was happening. I came in and we were going to vote in November. And every piece of literature that I either saw coming off of the desk that was there before me from the superintendent's office, honestly, even the literature that was coming out through the bond, or through the request, I saw that there would need to be 25% efficiencies. So what that said to me, even coming in cold without it being my work, is that we would need to be doing things differently, and I think Corey Lund had said that many times, that we have to do things differently. That's our promise to the taxpayers, to do that. So I do, again, the way I interpreted it, I do believe that was addressed, saying, you know what, this isn't, projects cost more. I don't think so. I think it was designed to say, this is what art's gonna cost, and this is what world language is gonna cost. We just didn't hold up to the efficiency piece, that it was like, we gotta come up with efficiencies, and we've been struggling to do that, so the efficiency piece hasn't kept up with the cost. I think the projected costs were probably pretty accurate. To the transportation piece, and I give estimates, very challenging to know without a reboundary. I mean, you guys can tell me where each of their bus stops, whoever rides a bus or whatever, what time the bus arrives, what time the bus drops the kids off. In absence of those boundary draws, the best example I have is the trend data either like the for example, I know, you know, kind of to the question of, our kids are gonna be riding the bus 55 minutes up at Marine. I know if a bus leaves the high school and we truly only have 50 minutes to get it up and back down before the bell time, I know it can't be more than that. Can I say this is exactly what the route time is going to be? Unfortunately, I can't, because honestly, I can't even say that annually. Your route can change, and you can be add, plus, or minus. Can I look and say, where are we today? How many kids at Afton, going to Afton, are riding a bus longer than 40 minutes? Absolutely I can. Can I say, is that, you know, how many kids do we have living in the most northern part of Marine, and the distance, and will that probably equate? Sure. Can I say it with all certainty? No. I can't even say it with all certainty, honestly, yesterday and this morning. You know, it's the best answer I can give with the information I have at the time, so I apologize if it seems like I'm trying to skirt. It's just the best example that I have. Is there a plan for transportation? Sure there is. Do we have parameters set? There is. We have to redraw boundaries. Do we have parameters set as far as what right now is procedurally ride times and what we go benchmark by? Absolutely. Can I tell you exactly what every route is going to look? No, I can't. No, I can't. And so if that's an apology, I'm sorry, but again, I couldn't even do that yesterday. So, you know, I do the best I can with the information I have at the time. If I'm a poor communicator, I am so sorry for that. I certainly recognize the lack of trust. I can't fix that. I would say, you know, pieces of it, however that existed before me, and clearly will probably exist beyond me. But I would do anything to help you with that. I just don't know how I can answer a very, very specific, and then when I can say that, but I can't use examples because it's not real yet.
And then I guess the question, oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. And then a follow-up question to that would, to me, be why aren't preliminary even boundary maps being offered? Because I think that the concept would be useful, it sounds like, to you, in your estimations, to answer public questions. As well, I think, as to the families, to understand what are we looking at, what building sizes are we looking at, what teachers are we looking at, because we're hearing that your child's, you know, that our children won't end up in a school that has 35 kids in every classroom, which I understand to be everyone's goal, that we all have moderately sized classes where wonderful teachers can do wonderful work with kids who need them. So, I would like to know, why aren't even preliminary possible maps being used to give some preliminary answers there? And I understand you don't want to promise the public something that then will get changed, because then you'll get all those angry emails too. But I just think, I don't like angry emails either. I just think that would be really helpful in answering some of these questions, even if there's a couple different scenarios. I know, like, South Washington County is redrawing boundaries in the north end because they're dealing with the same problem that we're dealing with here. And there were like 4 different options. So I just think maybe different options and saying it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. That way you're not promising anybody anything. But there's some better metrics, some better solid data on how can we estimate bus ride times, how can we estimate building size, classroom size, numbers of teachers, how many numbers of teachers might still have to go. Because we're saying we're not going to cut teachers, but as a teacher, I look at that. I've been through losing my job a number of times because of numbers and money. And I think I still can't quite shake out, like, when we consolidate rooms. And
So a couple of things.
So I don't know. Lots of questions. I'm
So
sorry.
we aren't going to be busing kids to any place that we aren't already. We already have kids going from the high school up to Marine. We already have kids going from your school here to Marine. We have kids going from Marine. We have kids going from Withrow down to Lake Elmo. So we aren't going to increase ride times any more than they are now. Yes, if I'm a Marine student right now and I walk across the street to the school, I'm going to have a bus ride now instead of walking. So the fear that we're increasing those. And for those of you who were there at the public forum when Ben Davis spoke, he spoke to that. As far as teachers and not losing teacher jobs, part of why people ask, why is the timing now? If we wait, we go on as we have, and we hire new teachers for the new elementary. And then if 2 to 3 years down the road, we say, you know, we should have really done that, then we do look at cutting a significant number of teachers. This is too simplistic, but let's say that we were going to, let's say we weren't, this building was empty right now, and we were going to take Withrow and Marine, and we're taking the kids and the teachers, and we're moving them down here. We're going to a different place. We aren't changing the number of teachers, number of kids, hopefully, they just move. And then, in addition to that, we're going to need to hire some for the new building. If we don't do that, go on business as usual status quo, and decide 2 or 3 years down the road we want to do that, then yes, then we do look at a significant number of teacher cuts. And so that's part of why, you know, if we're going to, it makes sense to look at it now.
And to the boundary piece, and because I get enrollment, and I'm the one that's looking at the open enrollment, and the alternative enrollment, you know, the kids that choose to attend other Stillwater schools. And the kindergarten classes and the orientations that are starting for the fall of 16, being very mindful of what does 17.
My enrollment paperwork sitting on the counter, because I don't know where my daughter's going.
That's right. And I welcome your optimism and believing that people won't take many options as fact, because that hasn't been my experience yet. Someone seems to always grab onto something and believe that to be true, and so I do appreciate the optimism, and I hope that that's the case. But I will say this, have there been rough draws? Do I know that Withrow and Marine will either go to Rutherford or Stonebridge? Yep. Can I say which school for certain? No. That we have, there needs to be kind of a parameters. We're gonna have a parameters conversation with the school board as far as, you know, cohorts. You have kids in what grades, and do you try to keep those kids together when they're moving to a different school or a different attendance area?
They're both open schools too, open classroom schools. There's no option for a traditional classroom.
Another piece, you know, is is there a grandfathering provision? I would say, you know, maybe when we look at the 8th grade, that's going to be, you know, at a junior high, because those are, you know, we have to reboundary for the middle schools too. You know, do you move the 8th grade for 1 year? What happens to the 3rd graders that are going to be caught in that pack? You know, who has first rights? Does everybody get sent home to their attendance area in a new boundary, and then who has first rights back? And there's a lot of those questions that won't be determined until the 18th. When we're figuring out building capacity, I mean, we know we're not going to pass one school to get to another. We're not going to take a Marine kid, have them go past Stonebridge or Rutherford to get to an Anderson. I mean, there's certain things that the guiding principles that you sort of live by, that you're not going to do that, or you're not going to necessarily have Liberty kids sitting over at Rutherford that are now going to be going over to Stonebridge because you have a building that's placed in its way. So we know that, kind of the rough draws of it. The challenge comes in is those are rough draws. And in absence, if the vote is no to bold, that's a very different boundary map as far as trying to figure out how everything works, even just for the middle schools in the south, than it is if the vote is yes. And then what if you're dividing neighborhoods, and how does that, it's just, again, and I apologized for this at the school board meeting, that the inference was it's a lot of work for administration. I'll be honest, there's a software program that we can sit and go deep, 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 deep. There's a lot of work in the decisions that go in to the boundary changes. What are their guiding principles? What are the parameters? What are we going to follow? That is why. And again, if I were to go to open house, which is happening in February for the 16 kindergartners, you're one of them, and you say, okay, and you say, well, you're slated for this school, but it might be this school, or it might be this school. That's not especially to a new family that is just kind of getting their kid in the mix, that's very confusing. That's I mean, you're in the system and you have a kid coming up and you're holding. And so
but I don't know how continuing to not know any parameters. I don't know.
But
We
it-
don't, I understand what you're saying. I
It's-
do understand what you're saying. I think just trying to speak from a parent standpoint,
Understood.
there's this feeling like I'm at the same time trying to buy in, like trying to figure out some place where I could get a foothold, and it's just a real slippery slope when I don't feel like, well, is there any, and then the answers are vague, and I just.
The other piece that might help is, remember we talked about earlier how Afton has the largest retention rate of their current students, 70%, 30% go to other schools. And I shared that Stonebridge about half and half. We'll need to reset, no matter, no matter what the decision is or not when we look at boundaries. We'll need to look at a reset about where would kids go where they live based on right now. So almost the notion of sending people to their home school and figuring out what those are. And then the same process. I mean, we have a lot of families who have choice, and we don't see that moving or going away. So when I'm hearing from you is like, well, if I'm moved to this school and I really want to stay over here, will I have that opportunity? Those opportunities will still be there. We aren't saying that we aren't going to have alternate enrollment. And we have lots of kids who are moving already within our schools.
Got a couple people that haven't spoken yet, yeah.
So I'm probably a minority here. I don't have children here. I don't have grandchildren, although I did grow up in Stillwater. I think we have a lot bigger problems than closing schools in this district. I, for one, did not vote for the levy, and I did not vote for the bond. When I talked to Corey, I told him that I want statistics and I'm sick of the fear mongering. If you do not pass this levy, our children will not have this and this and this. What happened? We lost teachers. You yourself are the 5th superintendent in 9 years. There's no stability in leadership. So when I look at that, I go, I'm hearing all these people. There's no trust in your decisions. There's absolutely no trust. And you yourself came here tonight and said, well, we know that Bridge to Excellence didn't work. It didn't work. What makes us feel that what you're going to do works? It's a whole lot bigger than closing schools. There is absolutely no trust in your decisions. And then when you take that into effect, and then you take this levy or the bond that's going to be building new buildings, and we're going to be supporting that they say tax neutral, who is going to pay the electricity? Who's going to be the janitors? Who's going to pay for the upkeep? I mean, people have to know these answers. It's not tax neutral in the same sense of not taxing the taxpayers. That's ridiculous to think that. But it was kind of, so these people are feeling betrayed. And that's why they're angry. They're feeling betrayed. And they feel all this stuff has just been pushed down their throat. And they're in survival mode. They're survival for their children. Does that make sense to you? It's a big job. You don't have any trust.
You're right, there hasn't been trust in this position for a long time. There hasn't been, a consistent message that I've had since day one is that teachers don't trust, families don't trust, administrators can't trust, community can't trust. And, that is something that I hear from the community, and I think many of you probably know who live and work outside the community that a lot of people know that there's a lot of chaos and turmoil, and has been in Stillwater for many years. Again, let me just finish. So, trying to market, build, all of that. You're right, people, unless you have worked with me before, you don't know me. You don't know that you can trust me. All that you can know is my past work and my past history. I think that's where the school board, when they hired me, spent a lot of time talking to the people that I've worked with. I worked for many years in Mahtomedi as a teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, worked in Spring Lake Park. And I think one of the things that you will find when you talk to those people is that I can be trusted. But I realize that takes time. From my position coming in, I couldn't come in and say, you know what, everything's rosy, beautiful, and we're gonna be fine. Because what's happened is we have a reactive culture, and we react, and we cut January to June every year. That's how we lose a lot of trust. That's how we lose families. And so whether it's good or not, is I feel like I have had a year, or you're supposed to have 100 days, maybe, have a year to be able to show and say, here are the facts, here's what I see, here's what the administrative team sees. And then the school board gets to decide, are we going to continue doing what we've done? And maybe we will, or we're gonna try something different. And so those are the choices we have. And, I've committed to, it was very clear to me before I came here that there's been a lot of turnover, and I've seen that. I've worked in other districts, seeing the colleagues who are working here trying to do some of the work and the turmoil and things that were going on. And one thing that I can say is that our principals and our directors, people who are here, they have kids. They have families who are living in the district. They want this district to be strong. They aren't going to make a recommendation that they think is going to ruin the district. I mean, they have kids who are going to be impacted by this. We have a middle school program, we have high school. It's, right now we're having the conversation about elementary, but it's trying to make a stronger district. And the school board and the administration has to look at the district. And I wish things were different.
So how would you feel if I told you?
Just a second, we are gonna be running out of time. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude and interrupt, but we're gonna do about 3 more questions and some people that have not spoken. Jean Marie?
I just want to comment, getting back to families who live in this area, who don't have transportation, who live in Section 8 housing. You're saying that you'll do shuttles for them and everything, which is really proactive. But what about the times when they just need to come and talk to a teacher, or they need to come and talk to a teacher because English is not their first language? How is that going to work if they're somewhere else? I have read that Oak Park kids will be dispersed into 3 different schools. I don't know, that's one of the talks. That's a lot of splitting up. So anyway, and the question from this parent was, where will my kids go? And at some point I have to help her tell her what the answer is. And the other thing is, I get really emotional, I'm really sorry, Nate knows this, I'm sad. I sat through all 3 evenings last week, and I listened tonight, and I hear overwhelmingly people are saying, please vote no. This is mainly to the school board. If these are the people that you're hearing, I don't know if people who are pro-bowl are writing to you, I would assume they are too. But in my mind, the people who are showing up and really care are overwhelmingly saying, put the brakes on it or stop it. And I think you need to listen to that, because these are the people who voted for you. I have a long history with this school, but this is only my opinion, so. Anyway, I just have you heard the people who are speaking at all of these meetings, and listen to them, and just please take it to heart.
And I would just like to take a quick minute. I'm just gonna say, Jean Marie is a fantastic educator in this building, and here's what I want to say. I didn't plant that seed, but I would like to say this because, I don't know, many of you know, I got thrown under the bus about 3 or 4 weeks ago over quite a bit of social media, that I was telling teachers they couldn't voice an opposition. I love the fact that she voiced an opposition. Come to work.
Outside of school hours.
I just want to share that, because that was a little, I have to share, that was unfair to me. I heard some talk that people were saying that I was muffling teachers here. Everybody can have every opinion that they want. Jean Marie's opinion is valued just as much as mine, yours, anybody else. This is an open forum and an open discussion, and I love the fact that the teachers at Oak Park have been so respectful of each other in this very hard emotional times. One of the things we talked about as a staff when this first came out was, please, please be respectful to one another in our conversations, and that we continue the conversation in a healthy and a respectful way, that we don't go off to our little camps and nobody talks to each other if somebody disagrees with this or that everybody could voice their concern and voice their feelings about it. And that has been how we've done it here at Oak Park since December 18th when this came out. And it's what I want to continue to foster in this building. And anyway, I'll stop there. There was one other person.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. For those of you who are not familiar with how I got to Oak Park, my daughter moved here as a third grader from an out-of-district school. I have a son who's younger, he's also now here at Oak Park Elementary. He had been at Lily Lake, and we moved him here so that we would have our students in the same building at the same time. For a short period of time anyway, until she graduates from 6th grade at the end of this year. People who know me know that I take a long time to listen and form an opinion. So just like the presidential campaign, I'm still forming my opinion. That said, there have been two things, as complicated as these circumstances are, that have been heartening to me. One is that I've had conversations with teachers in this building who have said that this is the first time that they have felt heard in a long time by district administration. And I think that as complicated as it is to come into a new position, whether you're Dr. McDowell or Superintendent Cantrelli, that has spoken volumes to me, that teachers who don't have to tell me that have chosen to tell me that. I have volunteered in this school every single year since my students started here. And I've also had a separate educator here say that they came to work in this school district because they have direct familiarity with working with our superintendent. They have seen wonderful things come out of her work. That too has spoken volumes to me. This is a newcomer to our environment who didn't have to say that to me, who chose to. And so those are two pieces of information that I have tried to keep in mind. They're people whose opinions I respect as I digest all of the information in a complex situation. I love this building. I came from a school environment where my opinion and the opinions of other parents were not just not heard, but were silenced. And I have not seen evidence of that, as complicated as the situation is in the school district, period. And I just want to point out that as difficult as this conversation is, we are very fortunate because we're not in that circumstance where parents are, and I mean completely afraid to voice their opinion for fear of retaliation. And so I want to thank you for the dialogue.
We've got, we're gonna do two more, and then we've got a learning session tomorrow night, and people can feel free to also come and speak to that. And so we're gonna go with Mrs. Rucker and Sabrina, and we'll finish with the two of you.
I just wanna know where my son's gonna go. I feel like we're gonna move, and we don't have a home that we're gonna go to. And I just wanna know when you guys have a projection of when you're doing your boundaries. I have clients asking me that have kids that are going to kindergarten here. Where are my kids gonna go? They're all up in the air and they're all worried and they have anxiety about it. And I just wanna know when you guys plan on doing the boundaries and stuff like that.
Immediately, there will be a school board learning session on February 18th, of which we'll just talk about kind of those decisions that I was talking about, you know, what are the drivers and what does that look like? And we literally will turn around a rough draft of what those boundaries will look like, I believe on is it the 25th of February? I think that's the next one. There will be then, you know, kind of the official proposal that comes in March. There will be public hearings in March with a final decision in April. But again, you'll be looking at, you know, as soon as this goes, we're gonna turn around and try to
I think it'd be
flip
a lot
that work.
easier if we all kind of had a rough idea. I mean, we would all receive it a little bit better. I feel like we all feel like we're gonna be homeless, pretty much.
Yeah.
And we have no home to go to, or our kids have no home to go to, so.
A week from the decision will be where we get those documents, and then so 2 weeks from the decision, we'll have the first draft of what that
And
looks
it's not
like.
gonna happen next year, it's gonna be the year after that?
Right,
Okay.
everything is the way it is for the 16-17 school
Okay.
year, everything.
Okay, I just wanna make sure so I can relate to all my clients that go to my daycare,
Yes,
so.
that's correct.
And if the vote is no, the same procedure happens.
Same procedure happens.
So
Does not
boundary
change.
talks and everything on the 18th.
Yeah, because it's not just the
Right,
South,
I
it's the
understand.
middle
Right.
schools,
I
it's-
just wanted to clarify that
Sure.
on the assumption that it would be yes.
Either way,
Yeah.
yes.
Sabrina.
I came here tonight with all the same concerns that every parent here has shared. So it's been nice to hear those answered, but
Another concern I have 3 children in this school. We are one of the families that moved to this neighborhood for Oak Park Elementary School, specifically to come here. My oldest is in 3rd grade. And we're now in the position where we've been looking for a new home. And against my realtor's better wishes, we told her to look, when we first started looking, to only look within Oak Park Elementary boundaries. That's where we wanted to stay. However, we are now waiting to make a decision till after February 11th. My oldest is in 3rd grade, and kind of going off of the word stability here, stability is huge for preschool and elementary kids. Huge. I've written papers on this, how the stability that kids have at this age affects them throughout their school years. So my oldest in 3rd grade, if we stay here, if we stay in this district, what I'm hearing is that she'll be here next year for 4th grade, and then she's been here for 4 years. She'll have 5 years in the school. She will move somewhere else where, if Oak Park is split between 3 different schools, is what I'm hearing, could be somewhere other than most of her core friends are. She will have to move for 1 year and then move again another year. This is hard on children this age. Has that been thought of? What support is going to be in place for these children? What is making me keep my children here, knowing that they will be okay, instead of moving them after this school year so that they will stay in a stable school district and not be making all these changes?
I also get several calls a week asking, are you in the Oak Park Heights School District? They always ask me that when they're looking for houses in the area. And now I have to answer to them that it's gonna be closing probably. So, I mean, a lot of people do move to this area just for this school.
Have you thought about these
Talking
kids,
about
though,
the
that are gonna be
emotions of these
going-
kids, I haven't, myself, I have a 3rd grader as well that goes here. She's hearing different things here. I wasn't going to talk to her about it until it was time, after a vote, if I need to talk to her about it. But now she's coming home and she's got questions, or she's hearing things, and I've had to talk to her about it. You know, I've made it very clear to her that if her school closes, she's gonna be okay. She'll be okay. She's gonna make new friends at a new school. She's gonna lose. She's been here since she was 4 years old. She's grown up with these kids. It is gonna be heartbreaking, and she's scared.
Those are very.
She's worried about. I just don't feel like a 3rd grader should have to worry about where she's gonna go, and I don't like that stress. I didn't want to talk to my daughter about this, but I had to because of what she's hearing at school.
There's a lot of change for kids this age, and so is there gonna be any support in place for these kids? That is a lot of change for a young child.
Then,
So that-
we're gonna have to hire how many psychiatrists now?
Let's give our kids a lot more credit than that. Let me speak, can I just say one thing about that as two perspectives. One, 3 years ago, I had the wonderful experience of choosing to take the position at this school and uprooting my kids, it was my choice, but uprooting my kids away from grandma and grandpa, 15 years of a life, all they ever knew. And as we pull out of the driveway, my son says, "Dad, please tell me this is all a bad dream." So we all hurt for our kids with any kind of a transition that either we choose to put them through ourselves or something that is forced upon them. In my prior district, I also had the experience of going from a district that had 8 elementary buildings and we consolidated down into 3. It was kind of a crazy time, but I mean, I'm not gonna get a perfect answer to this question because each kid is so different and you know your kids as to how they would handle a move like this. I felt like we did some wonderful things for our kids in working on a transition for them, if it comes to be that way. Some of the things that we did were once we knew where they were gonna be going to school, we did some field trips to the school where they spent some time in a FIAD class or in a classroom where they made some new friends. I just, they did pen pals with kids in a new school. There's no great answer to that. I'm not trying to give an answer to then gloss over and say, yes, your kid will be perfect and fine, because every kid is different in that. But I do believe that all of you who advocate and love your kids so much, and all of the teachers here who are so passionate about your kids, that we will do absolutely everything within our power to help them have as healthy and a successful transition as we possibly can. And I know that's not a great answer, but it's the best that I can offer. And Anne, one of our third grade teachers, we're going to end with your final comment.
This is really hard. I had my first child, a student that I had last year. And so I had the son, I had the boy, I had his mom, and his dad had also come to Oak Park and is a good friend of my brother's. So I know we have a lot of generational families that have been here for a long time. I student taught in this building. I loved it. I was fortunate enough to be hired back. I've been here 22 years, it's half my life. Well, almost. I'm a little bit older, but almost half my life I've been here. And it is really hard to think about us closing. But I also know Lily Lake. I went to Lily Lake as a child, and I'm hearing Lily Lake being bashed a little bit. I know the teachers there are wonderful because my son is there. And it's not a horrible, awful place. And the teachers there love the kids just like we love our kids here. And Bob referenced that he could, when Mrs. Wendorf was speaking earlier about her son and getting help. All the teachers want to help the kids in this district. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to go above and beyond and do what's needed for each child. And I think you'll find that in all the buildings, wherever, if we close, wherever your children will end up. And some of us will be going to some of those buildings too, some of the paras, some of the teachers, so they won't be going alone if it happens. I had, my kids brought it up one day because we were talking about the 6th graders at Wolf Ridge, and you get to go to Wolf Ridge, and then somebody said, well, no, because we're closing. And so I did talk to my kids about the possibility that we could close. And one of my kids did come up and she said, Mrs. Hanson, I hope you end up where I go. And and so there will be some of us there, hopefully. Hopefully we won't have to go, but if we do, just know that there are other teachers out there who are gonna love your kids just like we do. And really, and I have been stuck on the hill.
All right.
The teachers come out and push the cart.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Really, really appreciate it.
Situation.